The Kithra's Mercy was dying by degrees. Deep in the abyss, light years from the nearest mapped trade route, the old hauler bled atmosphere through microfractures too many to count. Life support struggled to keep the air breathable. The hydroponics bay was a frozen ruin, and the emergency batteries gave them 41 hours before the heating coils failed, and the ship became a tomb of cold metal. On the bridge, Captain Terrell Vaz stood motionless, the short velvety fur along his neck bristling with a dread he refused to name. His large dark eyes, adapted to the gentle dusk of his homeworld, tracked the tactical plot as 3 Korvax Raider signatures crept closer, their jamming field a suffocating blanket that had silenced the Mercy's distress beacon 8 hours ago. Engineer Vea, barely past her second molt and too young to be facing death, looked up from the sensor station. Her ears, mobile and expressive, lay flat against her skull. "Captain, the last relay drone is dead. No one heard us. The nearest patrol fleet is 12 days out, assuming they even bother with this sector." Terrell didn't answer. He already knew. The Abyss was a graveyard of failed colonies and vanished ships, a place the sector authorities had long written off. No rescue was coming. The Korvax would board, rip out anything valuable, and take the crew in stasis cuffs to flesh markets that operated beyond any law. The Ashari were a slight species, light-boned and graceful, prized for manual dexterity and endurance in zero-G construction, high-value merchandise. The tactical plot chirped. The Korvax had stopped jamming and switched to active targeting scans. A harsh synthesized voice slashed across every open channel, offering one chance to power down and prepare for inspection. Terrell's claws tightened on the armrest. Surrender meant slavery. Resistance meant a quick execution. He weighed the choice and found it hollow. Then Vea made a sound, a soft choking chirp of confusion. "Captain, something is happening. Gravimetric distortion, extreme magnitude, bearing 034 Mark 27. It's no, it can't be. There's nothing in that vector but dark space." Terrell moved to her side, peering at the readings. A gravity spike that bent the local metric, the unmistakable signature of a massive object transitioning from some folded dimension. The distortion swelled, and a shape clawed its way into real space like a predator tearing through silk. It was a warship, but not Korvax, not anything he recognized from the known catalogs. The hull was brutal and unadorned, angled slabs of gray armor, turret clusters that made the Mercy's pitiful point defense look like toys, a drive section that glowed a sullen, warning red. The ship's bow carried a name in blocky characters the universal translator struggled with, then rendered as 2 words, UNS-INVICTUS. Vea's fur went pale. She whispered a name that had become a ghost story among the fringe trade lanes. Humans. Silence gripped the bridge, cold and heavy as a neutron star. The Korvax Raiders, now less than 8,000 kilometers out, seemed to pause, their targeting arrays flickering in what might have been shock. Terrell's heart hammered against his ribs. He had heard the tailies, species that burned without reason, a Deathworld spawn that crushed diplomatic envoys into pulp with their bare hands, a coalition fleet shattered at some battle the records barely dared mention. Every spacer nightmare had a human at its core. The comm panel crackled. A new voice cut through the static, female, low and unafraid, speaking in flawless trade standard with an accent that made the words feel like bedrock. "Ashari vessel Kithra's Mercy, this is Commander Eiling O'Connell of the United Nations ship Invictus. We read your life support critical and hostile contacts on intercept. Do you require assistance?" Terrell stared at the speaker. Assistance. Not a demand, not a threat. He opened the channel, his throat tight. "This is Captain Terrell Vaz. We are disabled and outgunned. The Korvax intend to take us as cargo. We request aid, but be advised there are 3 armed raiders closing." A pause. Then the human voice returned, and something in it shifted, still calm, but now edged with a focus that made Terrell's fur prickle with an emotion he didn't yet recognize. "Understood, Captain. We'll handle it. Keep your transponder lit and stay clear of the firing lines. Invictus out." The channel closed. On the plot, The human warship rotated with a speed that should have been impossible for its mass, drive wakes flaring as it placed itself between the Mercy and the Korvax. The raiders' jamming died instantly, replaced by frantic tactical chatter that the translator painted in hues of alarm. Vea clutched Terrell's arm. They're going to fight, one ship against three. Terrell didn't answer. He simply watched as the Invictus's turrets began to track, and the void lit with the silent promise of annihilation. The Korvax raiders were not cowards. Their species had carved a brutal reputation across the fringe through ambush, overwhelming force, and a complete absence of mercy. But as the Invictus settled into its intercept geometry, the command channels flared with something that Terrell's comms officer translated as tactical indecision laced with genuine fear. The human ship's energy profile was a howl of restrained power, its reactor output dwarfing the combined signatures of the raiders. The Korvax leader, designated Splinter of Screams by the translator, opted for bluster, broadcasting an ultimatum that claimed this sector as Korvax protectorate space and ordered the human vessel to withdraw immediately. The Invictus's response was a single railgun slug. It crossed the void at a fraction of light speed, a kinetic round the size of a cargo crate that struck the lead raider amidships. The Korvax hull, built for intimidation and slave catching, did not deflect or absorb. It simply came apart. Armored plates peeled backward like petals, atmosphere erupted in a white plume that flash froze into a glittering cloud of crystals, and the ship's reactor went critical a heartbeat later, blooming into a brief, violent star. On the Mercy's bridge, no one spoke. Terrell's breathing had gone shallow, his mind struggling to reconcile the image with physics. The remaining two Korvax broke formation in a panic, one peeling off to launch a spread of plasma torpedoes, while the other dumped a full salvo of kinetic harpoons, weapons meant to disable to capture. The Invictus ignored the incoming fire. Point defense clusters, barely visible as rotating blurs, swept the torpedoes into expanding clouds of gas. The harpoons shattered against a barrier that flared with a violet shimmer the sensors couldn't classify. Commander O'Connell's voice returned on the open channel, not to the Korvax but to Terrell. "Captain Vaz, you might want to brace your crew. This will get bumpy." Terrell barely managed a warning before the Invictus's main battery spoke. 3 turrets, each housing twin magnetic accelerators, fired in staggered sequence. The rounds weren't targeted at propulsion or weapons. They punched straight through the forward sections where the Korvax kept their bridge pods and slave pens. The human gunners had read the raiders, internal layouts from drive plume analysis and hull temperature differentials, and they placed their fire with a precision that spoke of long, ugly experience. The second raider detonated, its spine snapped. The third tried to run, dumping decoy buoys and spooling its FTL drive. The Invictus's captain did not let it go. A nuclear torpedo, low-yield by human standards, still monstrous by any sane measure, streaked from a ventral tube and detonated less than a kilometer off the raider's stern. The blast sheared off engines, ruptured containment, and sent the ship tumbling, dead and dark. 12 seconds. The engagement had lasted 12 seconds. Terrell became aware that Vea was trembling against his side, her large eyes fixed on the view screen where the last Korvax wreckage was expanding into a field of metallic debris. The rest of the bridge crew stood frozen, their fur slicked with a thin sheen of stress perspiration. No one cheered. The destruction they had just witnessed was too absolute, too effortless. The tales about humans hadn't been exaggerated. They had been understated. The comm chimed again. O'Connell's tone was unchanged, level, almost conversational. "Threat neutralized. Captain, we read multiple casualties aboard your vessel and your life support clock is in the red. I'm moving the Invictus into docking range and dispatching damage control and medical teams. Please clear your portside airlock and prepare to receive boarders." Boarders. The word hit the bridge like a physical blow. Terrell's first officer, a grizzled veteran named Jarath, stepped close and murmured, "Captain, do we let them aboard? If the stories are even half true, these creatures can tear a hatch off its hinges with their bare hands. We would be helpless." Terrell looked at the debris field. at the fatting radiation signatures of 3 ships that moments ago had held them in a death grip. The humans had done this without being asked for any payment, without treaty obligation, without even a moment of negotiation. And now they were offering medics, offering repair crews, while still radiating enough firepower to vaporize the Mercy 100 times over. "Open the airlock," Terrell said. "And Jorath, tell the crew that anyone who points a weapon at our guests will answer to me personally. Whatever these humans are, they just saved us. We owe them the benefit of our trust." He didn't say what he truly thought. That trust or not, the humans would come aboard regardless. If they meant harm, there was nothing in the galaxy that could stop them. The airlock cycled with a hiss that felt deafening in the corridor's stillness. Terrell had assembled a small greeting party, himself, Jorath, and Vaya, who had insisted on staying despite his orders. The inner hatch slid open, and the first human stepped through. The figure was immense. The pressure suit only emphasized it. Broad shoulders, thickened limbs, a chest that seemed built around a cage of durasteel rather than bone. The helmet was a featureless visor of dark composite, and the being moved with a weight that made the deck plates groan. Behind the first, 2 more humans followed, these hauling sealed crates marked with medical caduceus symbols. A fourth carried a toolkit that looked heavy enough to crush an Ashari under its mass. The lead human halted, raised gauntleted hands to the helmet's seals, and twisted. The helmet came off with a sharp pneumatic click. Commander Eiling O'Connell faced them, and Terrell felt his prepared greeting die in his throat. She was not beautiful by Ashari standards. Her features were too hard, too asymmetrical, a pale scar bisecting one eyebrow and a nose that had clearly been broken and reset at least once. Her hair was cropped short, the color of dull copper, and her eyes were a pale gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But the expression she wore was not the cold, predatory mask he had feared. It was tired and alert, and unexpectedly gentle when her gaze swept over Vaya. "Captain Vaz," she said, and her voice in person was even more grounding than over the comm. "I'm Eiling O'Connell. This is Lieutenant Griggs, our chief medic, and Senior Chief Tanaka, engineering." The other 2 humans had removed their helmets as well, Griggs a lean-faced man with kind eyes, Tanaka a stocky woman with grease permanently etched into the creases of her hands. "Show us your worst casualties first." Terrell led them to the common bay where the wounded had been gathered. 12 Ashari lay on makeshift pallets, burns and crush injuries from the initial Korvax probing attacks that had disabled the Mercy. Griggs knelt beside the first patient, a young navigator whose leg had been pinned under a collapsed support beam, and opened his kit. The human medic's hands, thick-fingered and scarred, moved with surprising delicacy as he applied a spray sealant that stopped the bleeding, and injected a cocktail of broad-spectrum antibacterials designed for Ashari biochemistry. "How do you have Ashari-compatible medicine?" Vaya asked, her fear momentarily overridden by curiosity. Tanaka answered without looking up from where she was already patching a coolant leak on the bulkhead. "Human ships maintain databases on every known sapient species. We synthesize what we need on the fly. Never know who you'll run into out here." The casual competence of it was staggering. While Griggs worked through the casualties, Tanaka and her assistant moved through the ship, identifying failing systems and shoring them up with a speed that made Vaya's ears perk with professional astonishment. The Invictus had extended a docking tube and umbilical, pumping fresh atmosphere and power into the Mercy's depleted reserves. Within an hour, the ambient temperature had risen above freezing. The hydroponics lamps flickered back to life. Terrell found Commander O'Connell in the engine room, examining the main reactor housing with an expression that reminded him of a teacher assessing a student's flawed homework. She glanced at him as he approached. "Your fusion plant is a mess. Good design for fuel efficiency, but your containment field has micro-instabilities. Tanaka can tune it, but you'll need a full rebuild at a proper yard." "Commander," Terrell said, "I don't understand. We're strangers, aliens. Your people have no obligation to us, and frankly, my crew was terrified when you appeared." The stories about humans, they paint a picture of unrestrained violence. O'Connell straightened, fixing him with those pale gray eyes. What do you know about Earth, Captain? Very little. I've heard it's a high-gravity world, hostile to most carbon-based life. That your species evolved under constant environmental pressure. Predators, tectonic instability, atmosphere rich in corrosive elements. The usual nightmare cradle. Nightmare cradle, she repeated, and her lips quirked in something that was almost a smile but carried no humor. We call it home. And the thing about growing up in a place that's always trying to kill you is that you learn to fight back. But fighting isn't the same as cruelty. The Korvax take slaves because it's profitable. We break slavers because it's right. That's the difference. She turned back to the reactor, and Terrell stood there, wrestling with a truth that was rewriting everything he thought he knew about the monsters in the dark. The hours that followed blurred into a haze of activity. Tanaka's engineering crew had the Mercy's primary system stabilized and began fabricating patch plates for the hull breaches using the Invictus's onboard printers. Griggs had stabilized all 12 critical patients and moved on to treating the rest of the crew for dehydration, oxygen deprivation, and a dozen minor ailments that had been ignored in the struggle to survive. No one asked for payment. No one mentioned salvage rights or favors owed. Terrell found Vea sitting with Lieutenant Griggs in the common bay, watching the human medic suture a gash on a crewmate's arm. The Ashari were slight, built for arboreal environments on a world with gentle breezes and low gravity. Griggs's hands, by comparison, looked like they could crush stone, yet the needle moved with a precision that made Vea's ears twitch in fascination. "How do you do that?" she asked. "Your species is so dense, so strong. I would have thought your fine motor control would be limited." Griggs chuckled, a low rumble that vibrated through the deck. "Practice. Lots of practice. And necessity. On Earth, if you can't thread a needle in a storm, someone dies. We don't get to choose the conditions we work in." The medic tied off the suture and leaned back, eyeing Vea with an expression that was strangely paternal. "You're an engineer, right? Tanaka mentioned a bright kid who knew the ship systems better than anyone." Vea's fur rippled with a flush of pride. "I try. I've been aboard the Mercy since my second molt. She's more home than anywhere else." Griggs nodded. "Then you'll want to talk to Tanaka about the coolant manifold. She's got a modification that'll boost your heat dissipation by 12%, but she needs someone who knows the layout to run the secondary feeds." Vea scrambled to her feet, her earlier terror buried under a surge of professional eagerness. Terrell watched her go, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the restored heating. His crew was no longer cowering. They were working alongside the humans as if the nightmare had never happened. Commander O'Connell appeared at his elbow, a sealed cup of something steaming in her hand. She offered it to him, a mild herbal infusion Griggs had declared safe for Ashari biology. Terrell accepted it, the warmth seeping into his palms. "Your people adapt quickly," O'Connell observed. "Most species we encounter spend the first 6 hours in shock. Yours are already swapping technical specs with my crew." "We are a practical people," Terrell said. "Survival demands flexibility, but I must be honest, Commander. When your ship appeared, I expected to die, not at the hands of the Korvax, at yours. The reputation of humanity is formidable." O'Connell took a sip from her own cup, and he noticed for the first time that her beverage was dark and bitter-smelling, nothing like the infusion she had given him. "Reputations are easy to build and hard to control. We've been in space for less than 300 years, Captain. In that time, we've been attacked 7 times by powers that assumed we were weak. We've been raided, invaded, blockaded. And every time, we hit back harder than anyone expected. That creates stories. Stories of blood and terror. Stories of consequences." Her voice hardened just for a moment. "The Kavathi Dominion took a human colony world 40 years ago, killed 50,000 civilians. We glassed their home fleet and occupied their capital until their Senate signed an unconditional surrender. The Xanth Imperium raided a passenger liner, sold the survivors to a syndicate. We tracked down every member of the syndicate and returned the survivors home, then dismantled the Imperium's entire naval infrastructure. Not their cities, not their civilians, just their ability to wage war. Terrell felt his fur stand on end. That's a terrifying kind of restraint. It's proportionate, O'Connell said. We don't start fights, but we finish them. And we don't abandon people who need help. That's not policy, that's who we are. Before Terrell could respond, the Invictus's comm system pinged across O'Connell's wrist unit. A voice, clipped and urgent, spoke in that same human language that sounded like grinding stone. O'Connell's expression shifted, the warmth draining away and leaving something sharp and focused. Understood, prep for immediate detachment. She looked at Terrell. We've picked up a distress call from a passenger transport 2 jumps from here. They're under attack by a Korvax cruiser squadron. I'm sorry, Captain, but we need to break tow and respond. We'll leave a beacon buoy stay on this heading, and a patrol vessel will intercept you within 3 days. Terrell's heart lurched. You're leaving. Those people are minutes from dying. Your ship is stable. You'll make it. She met his eyes, and there was something raw in her gaze, something that looked almost like guilt. I don't like it, but I can't ignore a call. Not ever. He understood. He didn't like it either, but he understood. Go, save them. We will manage. O'Connell nodded once, then turned and strode back toward the docking tube. The humans withdrew in a crisp, efficient flurry, and within 5 minutes the Invictus had sealed its airlocks, retracted the umbilical, and was pulling away. Its drive flared, and the massive warship folded itself back into the deep dark, leaving the Mercy alone again in the silent expanse. Vaya came to stand beside Terrell, her eyes tracking the fading glow. They'll come back, right? Terrell put a hand on her shoulder. He didn't answer, because he didn't know. The Mercy limped onward through the abyss, riding the momentum the Invictus had imparted. The beacon buoy chimed its steady reassurance, and the life support held, but a new quiet settled over the ship, a silence laced not with despair, but with a fragile, unfamiliar hope. Terrell stood on the bridge, watching the long-range sensors for any sign of the returning warship. Vaya sat at the engineering station, going over Tanaka's modifications with obsessive attention. The crew moved through their tasks with renewed energy, the memory of human competence still buzzing in their nerves. 12 hours into the tow drift, the comm panel crackled. Terrell lunged for it, expecting O'Connell's voice. What he got instead was a burst of static-laced screaming, a woman's voice, raw with terror, speaking some dialect of trade standard too garbled to parse. Behind the voice, the unmistakable thunder of weapons fire. Then the channel died. Another ship, another slaughter, and the Invictus was already racing toward it, leaving the Mercy behind. Terrell forced himself to breathe. Can we trace that signal? Jorath shook his head. Too degraded, but it came from the same vector as the distress call. The humans must be engaging. The bridge crew exchanged glances. They all understood what that meant. The Invictus was now committed, possibly outnumbered, and the Mercy was a sitting target. The Korvax might have scouts, might have tracked the human ship's departure. If even one raider lurked nearby, the Mercy was dead. Vaya's voice cut through the tension, sharp with alarm. Captain, I'm picking up a faint energy signature, low-powered, probably running dark, bearing 180 relative. Terrell's blood chilled. Show me. The plot resolved a contact, small, sleek, built for stealth. A Korvax hunter-killer, designed to shadow convoys and strike when the escorts left. The Invictus's departure had flushed it from hiding, and now it was creeping closer, its course a slow, patient intercept. They're waiting to see if the humans come back, Jorath said, his voice a hollow rasp. If not, they'll pounce. Arm whatever we have left, Terrell ordered. Divert all remaining power to the forward cannons. We won't go quietly. The Mercy's weapons were pitiful. A pair of light-pulse lasers meant for debris clearing, a single-point defense turret that could barely swat a missile. Against a hunter-killer, they would be as effective as harsh language. But Terrell would not surrender, not after everything. The hunter-killer closed the distance with the confidence of a predator that knew its prey was helpless. It dropped its stealth shroud, flooding the comm channels with that same harsh synthetic voice Terrell remembered from before. Ashari vessel, your guardian has abandoned you. Power down and prepare for boarding. Resistance will be met with immediate decompression of occupied compartments. Terrell opened the channel, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his gut. You know what will happen if the humans return and find you here. The Korvax laughed, a tinny, grating sound. The humans are engaged 80 light-years away, dealing with a cruiser squadron twice the size of the one they destroyed here. They won't return for hours. By then, you'll be stripped and scattered. Now comply or we vent your bridge. Terrell's hand hovered over the weapon's console. He was about to give the order to fire, a futile gesture, but a gesture nonetheless, when the plot shrieked a warning. A gravity spike, massive, the same bearing as before. The hunter-killer's sensors must have registered it at the same moment, because the Korvax commander's voice cut off mid-threat. The sleek raider began a panicked turn, its drive spooling frantically for a jump it would never complete. The UNS Invictus tore out of folded space less than 200 kilometers from the Mercy, its hull still glowing with dissipated energy from the brutal translation. Its weapons were already hot, its turrets already tracking, and the voice that erupted across every frequency was not Commander O'Connell's. It was deeper, rougher, a male voice that sounded like an avalanche given purpose. Korvax vessel, this is Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, acting captain of the Invictus. You have exactly 0 seconds to surrender. The hunter-killer fired, a desperate, reflexive spread of torpedoes aimed at the Mercy's reactor section. The Invictus's point defense didn't just intercept them, it erased them from existence, a web of coherent light and kinetic slugs that left nothing but a fatting ripple of radiation. Before the Korvax could fire again, a single railgun slug punched through its engine block. The raider convulsed, lost attitude control, and spiraled into a cloud of debris. The entire engagement lasted less than 4 seconds. Terrell sagged against his console, his legs threatening to buckle. On the comm, the voice, Vasquez, spoke again, its gruff edges softening. Apologies for the deception, Captain Vaz. Commander O'Connell anticipated the Korvax might have a shadow on you. We let them believe we'd left. The distress call was real, but we had backup. Invictus never actually departed the sector. Vea let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. They tricked them. They used themselves as bait. Terrell keyed the comm, his voice thick with a gratitude he couldn't adequately express. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, I don't know what to say. Say you'll hold position, Captain. We're towing you the rest of the way personally. Commander's orders. And she says to tell you no one gets left behind. Ever. The Invictus moved alongside the Mercy like a watchful leviathan, its massive bulk throwing the Ashari freighter into deep shadow. Towing grapples extended from the human warship's hull, locking onto the Mercy's docking braces with a series of solid clangs that resonated through the superstructure. The message was unmistakable. You are under our protection now. But the Korvax were not finished. The hunter-killer's destruction had triggered a silent alarm, and somewhere in the dark between stars, a larger predator answered. Terrell was on the bridge when the alarms blared again. This time, the threat was not a stealth raider. It was a full-blown assault carrier, a scarred monster of a ship that had been hiding in the wreckage field left by the earlier battle, its power signature masked by the debris, ambient radiation. The carrier had waited, patient as a stone. For exactly this moment, when the Invictus was physically tethered to the Mercy, its mobility constrained. The carrier launched its payload not at the human warship, but at the Mercy. Boarding pods, dozens of them, each packed with Korvax shock troops in heavy assault armor. They hammered into the freighter's hull like a swarm of metal hornets, breaching charges blowing through bulkheads in a cascade of explosive decompression that the Mercy's emergency seals could barely contain. Terrell drew his sidearm, a simple pulse pistol that felt absurdly light in his grip, and barked orders. All hands to defensive positions. Seal the bridge and engineering now. The Korvax came in a flood of armored bodies and brutal close-quarters weapons. They were larger than Ashari, their forms encased in thick ceramic plating, their faces hidden behind angular helmets that reflected the emergency lights in sickly orange glints. Their tactics were straightforward: overwhelm, suppress, capture. They fired concussive rounds that sent crew members sprawling, their limbs twisted at wrong angles. They swung shock batons that left sizzling burns across fur and flesh. Joreth fell in the corridor outside engineering, a Korvax blade punched through his shoulder. Vea screamed his name and fired her own pistol, the bolt glancing off the attacker's chestplate. The Korvax backhanded her across the face, and she crumpled. Terrell fired until his weapon's charge indicator flashed empty. He fumbled for a spare power cell, knowing he wouldn't make it in time. A Korvax soldier loomed over him, its blade raised for a killing stroke. Terrell looked up into that faceless helmet and found a strange calm. He had done everything he could. His crew had fought. It would have to be enough. The blade began its downward arc. And stopped. A hand, a human hand, bare, knuckles scarred and thick, had closed around the Korvax's wrist and arrested the swing as if gripping a child's toy. The Korvax soldier had just enough time to turn its helmet before a second hand, moving with explosive speed, tore the helmet clean off its seal, and delivered a fist to the exposed skull that shattered bone and sent the body crashing into the bulkhead. The human marine stood in the corridor like a wall of wrath. Power armor plates shifted over a frame that made the Korvax look fragile, a visored helm scanning the scene with predatory calm. Behind him, more humans poured through the breaches the Korvax had made, their entry as violent and inevitable as a rockslide. Shotguns roared in the confined space, fléchette rounds shredding Korvax armor at point-blank range. Combat blades, monomolecular-edged, cut through ceramic plating with a shriek that set Terrell's teeth on edge. The Korvax assault, so overwhelming moments before, collapsed into chaos. The human boarders didn't just repel them, they hunted them. A Korvax sergeant tried to rally its troops near the cargo bay, and a human with a heavy rotary cannon simply walked through the barricade, rounds chewing through cover and flesh alike. Another Korvax squad tried to retreat toward their boarding pods, only to find the pods already slagged by the Invictus's point defense cannons, their escape routes severed. Vea, dazed and bleeding from her muzzle, watched from the deck as a human marine took a Korvax shock baton across the back, a blow that would have shattered an Ashari spine. The human grunted, turned, and put a shotgun muzzle under the attacker's chin. The Korvax ceased to exist above the neck. The marine then reached down, lifted Vea with one arm as if she weighed nothing, and set her gently against a clear section of wall. "Stay low, kid," the marine said, her voice female and hoarse behind the helmet speaker. "We've got this." Within 10 minutes, it was over. The Korvax assault carrier, its boarding complement annihilated, tried to flee. The Invictus's main battery, no longer constrained by the need to protect a friendly vessel, put a full salvo into its drive section. The carrier broke apart, secondary explosions rippling through its hull until nothing remained but a spreading stain of molten debris. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez's voice came over the comm, flat and professional. "Enemy carrier destroyed. Boarding parties eliminated. Captain Vaz, we're dispatching medical teams. Please advise on your status." Terrell looked at the carnage in the corridor, at the human marines who were already tending to wounded Ashari with the same ruthless efficiency they had just applied to killing Korvax. He looked at Vea, who was being examined by a human medic while she stared at her rescuers with wide, wondering eyes. He looked at his own hands, still shaking, still empty of a weapon. "We're alive," Terrell said. "Somehow we're alive." The Invictus did not detach again. The towing grapples stayed locked, the escort remained tight, and Commander Eiling O'Connell returned from her successful defense of the passenger transport, personally oversaw the final repairs aboard the Mercy. The assault carrier had been the last gasp of the Korvax forces in this sector. Vasquez's intelligence indicated the slaver fleet had been pulling back, unwilling to tangle with a human warship that had demonstrated an alarming willingness to turn ambushes into traps. Terrell found O'Connell in the common bay, helping Griggs change the dressings on Joreth's shoulder wound. The human commander worked with the same quiet competence she had shown from the start, her hands steady, her attention absolute. Joreth, who had been the most vocal in his fear of humans, was now looking at her with something close to awe. "You came back," Joreth said, his voice weak but clear. "You planned for this. You knew they'd have another ship waiting." O'Connell nodded, tapping the bandage in place. "It's what I would have done. A hunter-killer and an assault carrier staggered engagement. The Korvax are predictable when they're desperate. We've been hunting them for 8 months. We know their patterns." 8 months, Terrell repeated. "You've been out here for 8 months hunting slavers. Patrolling, intercepting, making it clear that this section of space isn't safe for them anymore." She straightened, meeting Terrell's gaze. "The coalition governments won't patrol the abyss. Too expensive, too politically inconvenient, so we do it, unilaterally, without permission. That's a dangerous policy. You could start a war." O'Connell's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her pale eyes, a weariness so deep it seemed carved into her bones. "We've been at war with slavers since the day we left our solar system, Captain. We didn't start it, but we will finish it. One ship, one crew, one life at a time." Vea, who had been quietly listening from the doorway, stepped forward. Her ear was bandaged and a bruise darkened the fur along her jaw, but her eyes were bright. "Why? I mean, I understand the moral argument, but why this level of commitment? We're not your people. We're not even the same species. You owe us nothing." O'Connell looked at the young engineer, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then she reached into a pocket on her uniform and withdrew a small, battered photograph, printed on actual paper, creased and worn from years of handling. She held it out so Vea could see. It showed a group of humans, civilians, standing in front of a colony dome. Their faces were tired but hopeful. A child in the foreground clutched a stuffed animal that looked like a 6-legged cat. Behind them, the dome was cracked, its panels patched with scavenged materials. "That's New Kilkenny," O'Connell said. "A colony world on the fringe, settled by 300 families trying to build something away from the chaos of the inner systems. When the K-Vathi hit it, we were 12 hours too late. We killed every raider. We rescued the survivors, but we couldn't save them all. 50,000 dead, half of them children." She put the photograph away, her movements careful. "After that, we made a promise. Never again. Not to humans, not to anyone. If we can reach you, we will. If we can fight for you, we will. No treaties, no borders, no excuses. We don't leave people behind." The common bay fell silent. Terrell felt something shift inside him, a wall crumbling that he hadn't known he'd built. The humans weren't monsters. They weren't even soldiers in the traditional sense, fighting for territory or resources. They were a species that had looked into the void, seen the cruelty that thrived there, and decided, collectively, stubbornly, to be the answer. 12 hours later, the Invictus guided the Mercy into the docking bay of Starbase Themis, a neutral trade hub on the edge of civilized space. The Ashari crew disembarked to medical facilities, replacement parts, and a flood of bureaucratic questions that Joreth handled with characteristic bluntness. The Invictus resupplied, its crew cycling through shore leave in shifts, its hull still bearing the scorch marks of the recent engagement. Terrell stood at the viewport overlooking the docking bay, watching the human warship. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't elegant. It was a block of armored fury, built for one purpose and one purpose only. And yet, looking at it, he felt something he never expected to feel toward a human vessel: safety. O'Connell joined him, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She was due for her own shore leave, and Vasquez had the bridge. "Captain Vaz, I wanted to say goodbye before I headed station-side." Terrell turned to face her. "I don't know how to thank you. Words feel inadequate." You don't need to thank me. She extended her hand, a human gesture, palm open, offering contact without threat. Terrell had seen the gesture enough times now to understand it. He placed his own hand in hers, the size difference stark, her grip warm and firm but not crushing. Will we meet again? He asked. Maybe. The Invictus has another 6 months on this patrol rotation. After that, who knows, but you'll know we're out there, that's the whole point. She released his hand and offered a small, genuine smile, the first he'd seen on her. Take care of your ship, Captain, and that engineer of yours. She's got potential. She turned and walked away, her boots ringing on the deck plates, and Terrell watched her until she disappeared into the crowd of the promenade. Veo appeared at his side, still bandaged but standing tall. She's going back out there, back into the dark. Yes, Terrell said, she is. And other humans, other ships, they're all out there doing the same thing. I believe so. Vea was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the stories we heard about them were wrong, not about their strength or their violence. That part was accurate, but the stories never mentioned the rest. The kindness, the stubbornness, the way they refused to give up on anyone. Terrell put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture he had seen the human medic Griggs use with comfort and affection. Then we will tell new stories, stories that include the truth. We owe them that much. He looked out at the starfield beyond the station, at the endless dark where threats lurked and innocents cried for help. And somewhere out there, beyond sensor range, beyond treaty lines, a human warship was rising from the void, ready to answer. The galaxy was not safe. It might never be safe, but it was no longer alone.